Nazi Germany. You walk down the streets in Berlin where shops have goods in the windows and neighbors nod as they carry groceries home. But tension hangs in the air from new posters on the walls announcing that certain people are now forbidden from entering parks or using public transportation, and quiet whispers about arrests happening. Officials drop off papers at your door, asking you to fill out forms with your family's names and jobs, so you sit at the kitchen table completing them carefully before sending them back. One morning, authorities knock on your door and hand you a summons with your name printed on it, directing you to report for registration at the district office where you join a long line of neighbors waiting outside. Inside, you watch clerks at wooden desks stamping red marks across identification papers for each person ahead of you. And when you finally reach the front, the official barely looks up while muttering something about necessary government procedures before stamping your documents and handing you a newly marked card that lists specific shops you can no longer enter and streets you must now avoid. 1 week later, guards show up with lists that match your new papers and tell you to pack one bag before walking you to the station to board a train car packed tight with neighbors standing close in the low light. The train starts moving with no word on where you're headed. Bright floodlights hit the fenced gates when the train stops at some big, unknown place, and guards blow whistles to send groups into lines split by men, women, and kids as you step off. Clerks at tables give you a number and hand over plain uniforms to put on after you add your things to piles for sorting later. And now you stand waiting as they call out numbers to move you along to the next spot. Your numbers line keeps moving forward into a room that looks like showers, where you take off your last clothes and go in with a bunch of others before heavy doors close tightly behind everyone. Gas hisses out from vents up top, filling the dark space as people crowd together and movements slow down fast until everything goes completely still inside. Machines start up right away to pull the bodies out onto carts heading to ovens, while a new line waits outside in the lights. This was Nazi Germany. Between 1941 and 1945, the regime systematically killed 6 million Jews and millions of others through industrialized extermination. The process was designed, organized, and repeated without pause. Ancient Rome. You wake up in chains, knowing that your life no longer belongs to you because it was already sold to pay debts, or taken as punishment for a crime, or seized after your city fell in a war that you didn't start. Days earlier, you walked past the massive stone arena from the outside, hearing distant roaring and cheering from the crowds, not understanding then that those sounds celebrated people dying in exactly the situation you now face. Guards keep you underground in dim cells beneath the arena floor alongside others who share your fate. Some are convicted criminals awaiting execution, some are captured soldiers from distant provinces, and some were just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when slavers came through their village. You learn quickly from the veterans that survival isn't actually the goal here, because the crowd doesn't want balance or fairness. They want a performance that makes them feel powerful and entertained by watching someone else's desperation. When guards finally push you up the stone ramp through iron gates that swing open into blinding sunlight, the roar from thousands of spectators stacked in rising tiers around the arena. An opponent waits across the sand, holding a sword and wearing leather armor, while you look down at the dull knife and thin cloth you've been given, and the visible mismatch tells you immediately that this fight was designed to end only one way. You raise your weapon and circle your opponent across the sand, stumbling backward when his blade slashes your shoulder and draws blood that makes some spectators leap up, cheering, while others wave dismissive hands. You swing desperately and land a weak blow that shifts the crowd's energy as thousands of hands flash thumbs up and thumbs down gestures. And between exchanges, you see vendors selling food, while bookmakers collect coins from people betting on how many seconds you'll survive. When your opponent's blade finally pierces your ribs and you collapse onto the blood-stained sand, the crowd erupts in applause. Guards enter through side gates and drag your body in a trail through the sand toward the exit, while fresh fighters walk onto the arena floor from the opposite side, and spectators' faces turn away from your corpse to assess the new matchup with casual interest. These were ancient Rome's gladiatorial games, where thousands died for public entertainment over centuries. Death served as a spectacle rather than justice, designed to demonstrate imperial power through ritualized violence. Mao, China. You wake before dawn in the village to tend fields that your family has worked for generations, planting rice and vegetables in soil you know by touch, while sharing tools and meals with neighbors who help during harvest season. Life is hard with long days bent over crops and simple food at the table, but routines bring comfort, and the community survives together through seasons of work and rest. New officials arrive with instructions about collective farms and quotas for grain production that must be met, taking away your private plots and telling everyone to work together in massive groups organized by the state. You hand over tools and animals to shared ownership, while authorities demand reports showing increased harvests even when the fields produce less. And speaking honestly about poor yields becomes something people avoid in meetings where optimism is required. Your meals gradually become smaller bowls of thin grain porridge instead of rice and vegetables, yet work hours stretch longer as officials insist on meeting impossible targets for steel and crops. Your body grows weaker with hollow cheeks and shaking hands, but you keep walking to the fields each morning as neighbors stop appearing without explanation, and asking about their absence draws suspicious looks from local leaders. Admitting hunger aloud becomes dangerous because it suggests the policies are failing, so you stay silent when your stomach cramps and dizziness makes you stumble, while officials blame lazy workers for any shortfalls. Survival turns into quiet competition for scraps as people search for tree bark and grass to boil into something edible, and you exist in a state where your body wastes away while reports claim record prosperity throughout the region. Your legs stop supporting your weight properly, and you move slower each day with vision blurring at the edges. Not from any sudden violence, but from your body, consuming itself for energy it cannot find. You collapse eventually in your home, surrounded by family members too weak to help. And when death comes, it happens quietly without ceremony or official recognition as starvation, because records list other causes to maintain the narrative of progress. This was Maoist China during the Great Leap Forward between 1959 and 1961, where tens of millions of people died from famine caused by failed agricultural policies and mandatory denial of the crisis. The deaths remained largely invisible because ideology prevented acknowledgement of the catastrophe. North Korea. You wake up and get dressed while portraits of the supreme leader stare down from every wall, and you turn on the radio that fills the room with announcements praising the leadership's achievements before walking to your assigned factory. You stand with co-workers in the courtyard reciting loyalty pledges in unison before operating machinery for your shift. And each week, you present your ration card at the distribution center, where officials weigh out fixed portions of rice into your bag. Evenings bring mandatory gatherings in the square, where crowds stand in organized rows, clapping in rhythm and bowing deeply toward the platform. And the scarcity around you feels completely normal because you've never experienced anything different. Neighbors in your building watch each other carefully through thin walls and report unusual behavior to local officials, so you learn to control your facial expressions. One day, a relative makes a joke about the regime that gets overheard, and officials arrive without warning to collect not just the accused person, but the entire family, including you. Guards load everyone into trucks for transport to an unknown location, while neighbors watch silently from windows, and no one explains the charges or destination as the vehicle drives for hours into remote mountains. You arrive at a vast fenced camp where guards assign barracks and work details in mines or fields with quotas that must be met despite minimal food rations and primitive tools. Days blend into months, and then years of repetitive labor under watchtowers, and hunger becomes constant while time loses all meaning as survival replaces any thought of hope or release from this place. Your body grows weaker from malnutrition and untreated illness, while you continue dragging yourself to daily labor assignments, not from any single violent act, but from the steady accumulation of deprivation and exhaustion. You collapse eventually during work detail and die quietly in the dirt, while others continue their tasks nearby. and your death goes unrecorded as guards simply remove the body without ceremony or acknowledgement. This is North Korea's prison camp system that has operated for decades, where hundreds of thousands have been held under a policy of three-generation punishment that condemns entire families. Death is designed to be slow and collective, ensuring punishment extends across bloodlines rather than individuals. Stalin's USSR. You wake up in a shared apartment and pull on your work clothes for the factory shift, walking with your eyes fixed on the pavement and keeping silent when co-workers discuss politics, because blending into crowds feels like the safest strategy in a city where following daily routines without questions seems to keep trouble away. Several months back, your uncle's chair at Sunday dinner sat empty without anyone mentioning why. And within days, you walked past his apartment to see red official wax seals stamped across the door. Black cars suddenly begin appearing on your street in the early morning hours, and uniformed officers knock on doors and escort neighbors out in handcuffs. Not thieves or rebels, but the school teacher from 2 buildings over and the factory foreman who always arrived on time. You start marking a mental calendar of when the arrests happen. 3 families taken on Monday, none on Tuesday through Thursday, then 5 more on Friday. And in hushed conversations over shared walls, neighbors whisper about rumors that administrators in Moscow offices have written specific numbers on documents requiring local officials to fill quotas each month. When officials knock on your door late one night, they hand you paperwork listing charges so vague they could apply to anyone, counter-revolutionary thoughts or antisocial tendencies, probably identical to whatever your uncle received. They escort you to a grey administrative building where an investigator sits behind a desk looking exhausted rather than angry, and he actually appears relieved when he opens your thin file because cases with minimal documentation process faster through the system and require less paperwork. The questions he asks during interrogation don't actually change the predetermined outcome, and you realize midway through that your uncle wasn't targeted for any specific action, but was simply selected to fill a required number on someone's quota sheet, exactly the same function you're serving now. Your case gets stamped with official seals, and you're loaded onto freight trains heading thousands of miles east to labor camps in frozen wilderness, where you spend years swinging axes at timber in sub-zero temperatures with watery soup rations. Your body breaks down gradually from the relentless combination of cold and starvation and exhaustion until you collapse face down in the snow during a work detail. And in a distant Moscow office, a clerk draws a line through your name and closes your file as the system begins preparing the next month's arrest quotas. This was Stalinist USSR during the Great Purge from the 1930s through 1950s, where millions died filling arbitrary arrest quotas. Death came not from guilt, but from serving as interchangeable units in a bureaucratic system built around numbers rather than justice. Idi Amin's Uganda. You live in a country where violence feels theatrical and unpredictable, ruled by a dictator whose cruelty spreads through whispered stories in marketplaces and tea shops. Early on, you hear rumors at work that seem too horrific to believe, that the ruler keeps severed heads in his freezer, that he carves meat from his enemies' bodies and eats it to absorb their strength. And nobody laughs or dismisses these stories because you've seen mutilated corpses displayed on roadside poles and floating in rivers as public warnings. At first you tell yourself the cannibalism must be exaggeration designed to intimidate, but then you notice bodies arranged in specific poses at intersections and hear military officials making jokes about missing persons turning into dinner while crowds nervously laugh along. Executions happen in elaborate public ceremonies with speeches and forced audiences rather than quick, efficient killings, and the fear multiplies because you never know which stories are literal truth versus strategic rumor. People stop saying the names of the dead and instead use words like meat and animals when discussing victims. When soldiers in green uniforms arrive at your door one afternoon, they don't present arrest warrants or read formal charges, but simply tell you to come with them now, and they grip your arms like handlers moving livestock rather than officers escorting a suspect. During the drive to an unmarked building, you understand that this regime doesn't require proof of crimes or formal confessions, because what it needs is humiliation that continues after death, making you believe your body won't belong to you even in death. They take you to a bare room and kill you quickly without witnesses or ceremony. But the terror lies in what comes next. You won't be mourned as a victim, but remembered as something that was consumed. This was Uganda under Idi Amin's rule from 1971 to 1979, where an estimated 300,000 people died through executions, disappearances, and torture. Death became theatrical spectacle designed to maximize fear through rumor and dehumanization that extended beyond the moment of killing.